Recording? Yeah?
Yep.
Okay.
We're good.
Awesome. Hi, everybody.
Hi.
I'm Jessica Maitri, and this is Denise Jensen.
Hi, everyone.
Yeah, we're having a lot of fun. This is our second video together, and we are learning a lot as we go. So what we'd like to start with today is we're going to just guide you through a brief grounding, and we're going to do it at the same time. This is also for us. So we're going to go ahead and ground in. So if you're listening and you'd like to join us, go ahead and close your eyes. And just find a comfortable position and begin to notice your breath. So breathing in through the nose all the way into the belly. And just let your exhale be a little bit longer than the inhale. And just continue to connect to the breath and use the exhale to ground you further into the earth. So you can imagine a grounding cord attached to your lower body. And with each exhale, it grounds you to the center of the earth. And when you feel ready, you can tie the grounding cord off at the core of the earth, and then again, using your breath, inhale your awareness back up the grounding cord, and eventually coming back into your body. And just for a moment, begin to breathe in and out of your heart space. So imagine that your heart is doing the breathing. And with each inhale, your heart opens a little bit more. And we're setting our intention today to connect to each other's hearts and to explore with an open mind. And to speak our truth as it shows up in each moment. And taking one final inhale through the nose, letting it fall out your mouth. When you feel ready, you can open your eyes. Welcome back.
Thank you for that.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, that was beautiful.
Thank you.
I think it's so needed today, especially for the conversation we're going to have, right? Because I don't know about you, but when we talk about sex and oppression, for me, it takes me to an edge. And so needing to stay grounded is so important for this conversation. So thank you.
Agreed. Yes, yes, you're welcome. Yeah. So Denise and I thought what we would do, how we would start today, is we just introduce ourselves and a little bit, again, why we came together and why this topic is important for us. So I guess I can start. So I'm a mental health therapist and an embodied yoga therapist as well. And what my passion is to work with individuals to anchor more into their body so that they can begin to trust it more and begin to speak more of their truth. And Denise and I came together because we share a resonance. We share a lot of similar backgrounds and interests and ways that we want to show up to be of service. And so naturally we gravitated towards each other, and we've been having amazing conversations ever since, and wanting to share more of the conversations that we're having with more people. So.
Yes. And I'm Denise Jensen, and I have a life coaching business and really working with women around stepping into transitional phases. How do we, and helping them kind of step into that spirituality place along with really becoming expansive humans and navigating transition from kind of the darkness that we all go into, and stepping into that light and that spirituality, and starting to honor who we are in all parts of ourselves. So yeah, and as Jess said, we really have kind of that same experience in a lot of different areas, and so this all just really naturally resonates for us. So I'm super excited to be here and be having these conversations, and it's fun to have this evolve a little bit. So
yeah, and we can't be the only ones, and that's what we keep saying, is if we're having these conversations and we're resonating, there's more people that are going to listen and be like, me too, and now what do I do with it? And that was something that Denise and I talked about briefly before today's video, is not only do we want to share a little bit about our stories, but the most important thing is, what do you do with that now? Because there's a lot of story sharing that goes around in the world, and while that is part of it and a key part of healing, more importantly, it's like, how do you now take that experience and really use it as fuel to your next stage of healing?
Yes, exactly. And I think again, that's the piece that's really important and transformational, is so what, right? So we all have these experiences, but so what do I do with it? How do I navigate into the next phase and the next step? And so that's kind of, for us, what we're hoping to do is give you what that so what is, and maybe some next steps that you can use, or something to think about and ponder on a little bit. So.
And maybe we thought we could start with sharing like a brief bit about how sexuality was first like introduced, if you will, or, in our lives, and just kind of what that looked like as a young child. And then we'll just go from there. Does that sound good for you?
Yeah.
Okay.
That sounds good.
Yeah. So do you want to go for it?
Yeah, sure. I'll start. So as some of you might know, if you saw our last video that we did, I grew up, both of us did, we grew up in a very religious culture, and Mormon culture. And it was, when it comes to sex, it was pretty repressed, right? There's not a whole lot of conversation about it. I was telling Jess earlier, the first thing I remember about anybody saying anything to me about sex was, I was in a meeting with a whole bunch of other teenagers that were all kind of my age, and one of our church leaders, a male figure, was sitting in front of all of us and saying, okay, so here's what you need to know about sex. No necking, and necking is touching from here up, and no petting, and petting is from here down touching, until you're married, and then you can have sex, and then it's okay, and God loves you if you do that, right? And so I really tried to follow all the rules, right, until I turned 18. And then when I turned 18, I was like, sweet, I'm going to do all the things. And I did until I got married. And then I got married and I was like, this doesn't sound fun anymore, right? So then there was this whole kind of interesting navigating what that looked like, because I had been taught so long that sex was bad, sex was bad, sex was bad. And so then when I could have it, when I felt like I could have it, I had all the sex I wanted to before I got married. And then I got married and it was like, ugh, this doesn't feel good anymore, because it is, it's okay now. So it's been navigating that kind of dynamic, that balance back and forth between sex is okay and not okay, ever since then. And now trying to step into this place of really owning my sensuality and my sexuality and being okay with that. So how about for you?
Yeah. And, thank you. Yes, similar. And I also, for me, I remember I have a very vivid story that comes to mind where I think I was maybe 10 or 11, and I started my period pretty early as a child. And so I think I was starting my period, and I remember hearing the word masturbate and also menstruate. So I had these two words that I think I was kind of confused about. And I started my period for the first time, and I went to my mom and I said, Mom, I masturbated, but I meant menstruated, but she didn't know. And I remember getting this, this sense of, no, we don't do that. Like, that's not okay. And I was like, I was so confused because I had just started my period and thinking that now that wasn't okay too. And so it was very confusing. And the reason that popped up is because I don't think we're given the language that we need. We don't have the actual language at a young age of how to express exactly what's happening in our body, whether it's actual like sexual sensation or just having a period, because nothing was talked about. And whether or not you grew up religious or not, I just don't think our culture in general has been very supportive about starting that early in the home.
Yes.
Unless you were super, super liberal hippie, then of course that maybe had that conversation, but this is pretty new for most people.
And do you feel like that whole kind of way that we were taught, like not having language around what our bodies can do and around sexuality, taught us really young and really early on that we can't trust our bodies, right? We can't trust the thoughts that we have around our bodies, and that they're not, like, it sets the stage for my body isn't a safe place because I don't even have words to speak about it.
Yeah, and the more intense the feeling in the body is, the more dangerous it is, because
Yes.
then somehow, what I was taught anyway is that you can't trust that because it will then take over and you'll do things you'll regret, or and I just think you're right on. It sets the stage for you can't trust that feeling in your body. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh.
And then, what happens when it's suppressed, just like anything, it actually gets bigger. So anything you try and suppress, whether it's your voice or a secret or sexuality, it's like it becomes this eruptive force, especially when it's a prime need, a core need. So
yes. And then it just kind of takes over.
Yeah.
At least, I don't know about for you, but for me,
yes,
it just kind of takes over.
And maybe that's a perfect segue into what we talked about around power and like how that pendulation, right, of like it kind of takes over at some point, and you allow that to be how you get a power need. That
Yes. And then and I can't tell you how powerful sex has felt to me over a really long period of time. And sometimes it felt like that was the only way I could gain power. And so I would put myself in really precarious situations just so that I could have an opportunity to feel that power, because I was so disempowered by sex. Like it's kind of this weird dynamic, but really unsafe situations, and still finding, when it came to the point of having sex, still finding power in that. So it led to all sorts of other stuff, but yeah.
Well, and the power that for me anyway, the power that I thought I was feeling through being able to have sex in that way was a false sense of power. It wasn't true power. It was a power of like, look what I can manipulate, like look what I can get power over. And for me, men was what I felt oppressed by. And men also is kind of not just any man, but it's like the father figure, but it's also God, and feeling like I wasn't worthy of it. And so if I could get a man to have sex with me through whatever form of manipulation, then I was powerful because they were powerful over me, and so I got them.
Yes.
And I'm only now just being in conversation with you, Denise, this is where I've been able to not have shame around owning that part of my journey of admitting and owning that I have used sex for power in the past.
Yeah.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
And we have to give voice to that, right? I mean, I think that's the key, at least for me, is I'm starting to realize there's so much shame around hiding what we really have, like what we have created for ourselves, and shame around owning that power and that need to manipulate so that I can get a need filled. And so speaking it has been really especially important for me too, as well, is because then when I speak it, the shame goes away, and then the opportunity for me to step into a new way of interacting sexually shows up, and it's such a healthier way.
Because you brought it into the light, and then it gets to sit at the table now and have a voice.
Yes, exactly. Because it never had a voice. It was like this scary dark thing that just kind of hung out for a long time. And now there's language around it, right? There is ownership around it. And you can navigate it once you have language to navigate it with.
Right. And there's truth around it now, because when we grew up in an oppressed sexual kind of atmosphere, everything you do it has to be secretive, or you're not accepted or loved, or you're not part of the tribe, and lots of consequences. So sex ends up being tied to secrecy, tied to shame, tied to rebellion, and it also gets tied to things like motherhood, right?
Yes.
Children.
Yes.
Yeah, it gets tied to, if you have sex, that means you want to be a mom and you want to raise kids.
Exactly. And so then that ties us to, all of a sudden, if that's the only reason we're having sex, right, then we're all of a sudden chained to something, right? And whether we want to be or not, we get chained to this thing. I shouldn't say thing, because it's a child, right? But maybe more chained to an idea, right? And it makes us small.
Yeah.
And then sex only has one purpose. And what I'm realizing is there's so many more reasons to have sex than just to have a baby, right? It's about connection. And I feel like through sex, you can really kind of connect to another person's soul, and you can really have that really clear, open, soul to soul connection that really not many other things will give you that type of a connection. So it really is beautiful, and it's not just that purpose behind, it's time to make a baby.
Right. Or so it's tied to having children or making a baby, but sometimes it's also around like pleasing a man, or it has been, the purpose is to, if you're taught that monogamy is the only way and you have to be married to have sex, then that means that having sex with a man means he's the one forever. He's the one that you're supposed to give your whole life to. He's your, one and only. So there's so many stories behind how sex has been a way of women feeling imprisoned at times.
Yes. Totally imprisoned, which then makes sense why it feels so powerful, right? Because if we feel imprisoned and confined from all of these ways that we're supposed to be sexually, then being able to have that kind of power over a man to make him do what you want him to in that moment is the only way often that you feel like you can make a difference and have a voice. And so learning to have a voice before it gets to the point of, I'm going to have this sexual relationship with this person, or I'm going to make them I'm going to make them orgasm or whatever, it's really about finding your power before you step into that sexual moment.
Wow. I just feel like what you just said was so huge. I could do a whole video on just that, like that sex, that you needing to find your voice before sex is even part of the equation is so important. Because if you don't have a voice and sex becomes part of the equation, you default into maybe the pleasing or the old patterns of the victim story of the oppressed one, the one that doesn't get to have a say.
Yes. Speak a little bit more about that victim place, because I think we need a little bit more on that one.
Yeah, totally.
I'm hearing so many people saying, oh, tell me a little bit more about that. What does that look like? And what does that sound like? And how do I navigate that in my sexual relationships?
Yeah. So I'm going to speak from my story to give an example. I have heard myself so many times in relationships tell my partner, you don't understand. If you only knew what it felt like to not be able to wear tank tops, and when you showed your shoulders that you were a whore, or, you know, so while I was trying to convey what I've been through to a partner so they would understand me and get me and see me, it also wasn't helping me because I was still identifying as the whore or whatever, that the one that couldn't show her shoulders, you know, or had to wear garments or whatever.
Yes.
So it's not, it's like, it's almost like we don't realize that that's what we're doing when we're doing it. We mean well. When we share our stories about what we've been through, we mean well, and we're wanting to connect and be seen, but we have to understand that that's only one part. That's just the very beginning of healing, and that we have to keep going, which is what I think everyone's actually wanting, is to, what's the next step, you know?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. And do you feel like that next step, instead of talking about you don't know what it's like to not even be able to show your shoulders, but to really be able to speak from your heart center and say, no, this is what pleases me, right? Yeah. That's more powerful than saying, you don't understand this other victim space, but this is how I need you to please me, and this is what makes me happy.
Yes. Oh, I love it. I just got goosebumps. Yeah. Yeah. And not from a coercive space of like, you know, maybe if I'm sexy enough, he'll do something that makes me have an orgasm or please me, but actually saying, before you're even in the bedroom, you know, here's what I want in a relationship or in bed, or, and speaking it not from a coercive space, just from a matter of fact, truthful, honest space. So.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. But then that means we have to be vulnerable, right? And we have to own our truth. And that can be really hard too, right? So then it brings it back to this place for me of sovereignty. And we talked last week a little bit about sovereignty, but I think really when it comes to how do you have a really healthy, good sexual relationship with somebody, is understanding your own sovereignty, because you have to have your voice. You have to be willing to be vulnerable with yourself, right? Oftentimes we're not even willing to say to ourselves, this is what makes me happy. This is what, you know, makes me orgasm. So how can we speak it to somebody else? So getting really clear within our own selves and holding our own sovereign space to make that happen, I think is really important.
Mm-hmm. Any, I feel like called to also speak about that more, like how, well, and if you don't know, that's okay, but how have you been able to be more vulnerable with yourself? Or how has that looked kind of when rubber meets the road, you know?
Yeah. That's hard. So one of the ways, and you and I have talked about this a little bit, but one of the ways is starting to talk about what shows up for me. So vulnerability for me has not been about telling all of my really juicy sex stories, or telling all of my really juicy stories about, you know, things that have happened in my life. But vulnerability has been more of saying, you know, I don't know what to say in this moment to this person, or this is what I'm feeling right now, but I don't understand it. Vulnerability for me has been, and I don't know I'm learning how to do it in relationships, right? But it's been more of saying, this is how I am, this is what I'm feeling in this moment. So, hey, you know, in a relationship, all I feel like doing is just holding you. Will you just hold me for a little while? I don't know that I want any more than that. And being able to say that and not feel bad about it. Mm-hmm. That's vulnerability. For me right now, I think that there are layers of it, right? And we have to kind of navigate those as we're moving through the process. So, and what's vulnerable for you?
Moving out of being the pleaser to being pleased, like we said earlier, you know, like it's actually very vulnerable for me to not give someone what I think they want from me. So,
Yes.
if my partner wants sex, and I know that's super obvious for whatever reason, to say what you just did, to say, actually, could you just hold me? Or it could be even simpler than that. Outside of sexuality, it could be like, I don't really feel like talking right now. Could you just like give me some alone time? Or saying, it's just moving out of being a pleaser into asking for what we want. And I think ultimately that comes down to being afraid of losing connection. But the more we do that, the more we'll kind of make a new neural pathway of like, oh, that went better than I thought. Like, they're not gone. They just gave me what I asked for. And then before you know it, that becomes easier.
Yeah. Do you feel like being vulnerable starts like even way before sex, right? So you and I have had this conversation. When I get in relationships, like I want to eat whatever food that they eat, even though it doesn't sit well on my stomach, right? But I'm like, oh, whatever you want to eat is fine with me. Because, instead of even speaking my voice with something as simple as, no, I don't like that food, so I'm not going to eat it, but let's figure out another way to connect that's not through eating the exact same meal or whatever that is.
Yeah. Yep. That's simple. Or I like my morning times, and so I don't want to have to get up at the same time and go to bed at the same time. So I'm going to get up an hour early, and I'm going to do my thing, and I'm going to do my routine. You're right. It's before sex, or even just, owning what we want.
Yes. Yes. And for so long, like, and we haven't been taught that, right? I don't know about you, but that was never emulated in any relationship that I have ever seen. And so trying to navigate that has been really difficult for me. And I go back to what I was learned, which was, what I was taught, I guess, not what I was learned. What I was taught is women should be meek. Women should be silent. Women should make dinner, clean up after everybody, make sure the kids get in bed on time, and sit down, shut up, and be quiet.
Yeah.
And go ahead.
Well, I was gonna say, and on top of that, it's, ultimately the man knows what's best for the family. So if you have an opinion, you still have to run it by him to ask God or to have a priesthood, authority to say what's actually best. So you have a voice, but it's not really that big of a deal if a man trumps it. So
Exactly. So now what it's doing is navigating all of this stuff, because we realize now that sex plays a big part in all of this, right? Because sex has been manipulation for me in the past. How can I manipulate to get my needs met? Because I felt so disempowered for so long. And instead of standing up and saying, no, I'm an equal, and there's reciprocity in this relationship, and it's a give and take, instead of you're here as the male and I'm here as the female, and having no voice, but it's being this kind of equal in the relationship. And I think that I get the sense that not every man really is okay with always being the, here I have the full voice, but it's taught so much in our culture that as women, we really need to take that next step up and be willing to speak loudly, because I don't get the sense that it's that they want that power struggle, but that they've taken it because we've given it to them.
Or they were shoved into that role too. I mean, they're also victims of of whatever's happened for them too, of like, here, you have to know what's right, you have to hold the power, you have to make the decisions, and all the money, by the way.
Exactly. And all responsibility falls on you.
Right. That's a really good point. And actually, if any men are listening to this, which I hope we get more male listeners too,
yes.
I want to know, we would love to hear from you, because I want to know what men think about this, and what they wish women coming into their power would ask for and would do to help balance this out. I would love to get a male's perspective on that.
Yes, I would love that.
Yep.
So here's to all of the men who are willing to share what that actually looks like for them.
Yes, contact us.
Yes. Let us know.
Yeah. So sovereignty is like, because if we go back to that original question of okay, so here's our victim story, and then how do we make the pivot? I think what I have gained from what we're saying is sovereignty is the answer to that, and how you get that is to cut ties of trying to stay small, cut ties with like trying to please the man or the father figure, cut ties with sex having to mean children or imprisonment or loss of freedom, and cut ties of sex meaning the mother. So what was it around the mother?
So we were talking about the mother being really about we're trying to live out her needs through our sexual relationship, or we're trying to heal her wounds through that.
Right. And I also got this intuitive hit, I guess, of like, I wonder if at times we don't want to get bigger than our mom. Like we almost feel like we can't outshine her. And so if she's already staying small, we have to stay small. It's like a ceiling. We can't go above where she was. And so out of respect for her.
Yes. Oh, that's huge. That's huge. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think part of how because that's a hard, I don't know about for you, but for me, that's a hard one to navigate, right? Is how do I allow myself to be bigger than my mom in my eyes? And so part of that for me is staying grounded in the present, right? When I start trying to do this, thinking about anything outside of here in this moment, and staying grounded to the earth, then I let all that old stuff come in and really have a voice in what's going on in my present moment, instead of me staying present on here's how I feel in this moment, here's what's showing up for me in this moment, here's what feels good and what I want in this moment. That's how I create my sovereignty, instead of so staying really grounded in the present instead of trying to navigate all of these old relationships and old things. And
right.
Yeah.
And sometimes that means we might rub people the wrong way. I mean, because if we're not speaking from an attached space, then we're speaking truth at all cost, and that means that maybe somebody won't like it, and we know that. And that's kind of part of what we're saying yes to when we're healing this wound, is we do acknowledge that not everyone's going to be comfortable with our truth, and that's something we're willing to do.
Yes. Yes. Because I don't know about for you, I'm sure it probably was the same way, but I was taught that I needed to be liked and loved by everybody if God was going to love me. Right. And so everything I do has always been this, has historically always been about how do I make sure the largest number of people are going to like me, and be okay with who I am as a human. And stepping into that sovereignty, stepping into that grounded space now for me is about owning my voice and being okay with not everybody liking me anymore. And that's totally fine.
Yeah. And some will leave, right? We both have experienced that. That is something I'll speak to really quick, is that, this is part of why people don't end up making the changes needed at times, because it does hurt sometimes. I mean, when I left the church, I lost everything. I lost my family, my friends. And on some level, I knew that was part of the initiation, though, is that it doesn't always get to be butterflies and rainbows when you make the transitions, but it sure does open up a big space in your life for new, more resonant things and people to come into your life. Yes. So to understand that is part of it at times.
And to be okay with that process, right? I mean, it feels like sometimes we have to go through that shedding, and just allow that to happen. I think of like a snake shedding an entire layer of its skin and moving on to something else, and being okay with that. Because I've done the same thing, right? I have left relationships that didn't resonate for me anymore, and it meant leaving an entire house, leaving every relationship I had, every friendship that I had, because they were all tied to that relationship, and having to start completely over from the ground up, and doing that multiple times in my life. And it's scary and frightening, so you stay longer than you need to. And then it opens up to something different and better, and that feels more solid in who you are in this moment.
I love that.
Yeah.
Beautiful. Well, should we check in and take a deep breath and see if there's anything else that wants to be shared? Okay.
Yeah, let's do it. Okay, hold on. So I'm going to say this again in a little bit of a different way, but I feel like people are floating. They're not grounded anymore right now. There are some, but there are so many people right now that are kind of floating in this cloud of fear and ungroundedness. But they're ready to step into their voice when it comes to all sorts of different things, and sexuality being one of them. And so being willing to ground ourselves into the earth, and the meditation that you did, the grounding that you did at the beginning of this video, Jess, is perfect for anybody who is feeling a little bit ungrounded, to just tie yourself again to the earth and really ground in, because that's where you're going to feel your sovereignty. And that's where you're going to start really having that voice that you need.
I love that. And there's something about if we're not able to connect to earth, how can we really be in our bodies? It's almost like that needs to be the first step. Is we've got to maybe refocus to like you were saying, the present moment, and earth and what she needs right now is actually part of this process of healing. The sexual wound is actually getting more connected to Mother Earth and what she needs, and our bodies.
Yes.
Yeah.
And really like breathing into our bodies. I think we go throughout our days and we just kind of keep navigating whatever the next thing is, and we never take an opportunity to check in with our body throughout the day, which again takes us out of our sovereign space. So taking a moment every day, trying to be more intentional around taking a deep breath in and breathing out through every different part of your body, making sure you're getting air to every part of your body, so that you can really be present in this moment.
The breath is super important.
Yes.
Yeah. So I'm just going to take a minute for anyone that's watching. I'm going to take a minute. We're going to ask our higher selves or our guides anything that needs to be shared, anything that needs to be shared with our listeners at this time.
For me, the thing that's coming through is just a reminder that you're all okay. Whatever you're experiencing in this moment is okay. And it's beautiful, and it's exactly where you need to be in this moment. And there's more, and you can tap into that whenever you're ready for it.
Yeah, I'm seeing us like all arriving on a shore together, and something about water right now, and maybe because it's raining outside, I'm not sure, but like almost like I see us on the ship together, and we're arriving at a shore together, and that we're almost there, and to not lose sight of the shore, that we're not lost in the middle of the ocean right now like it seems. That this is very intentional, and we are almost to shore. Yeah.
That's beautiful, yes. And for me, finally, it's just so much love. I feel like there's so much love that's available to all of us right now. And I just want to share my love with all of you, everyone who's listening. It's a beautiful day. It's a beautiful time to be alive. There's so much happiness available for all of us if we just want to step into that.
Yeah, I'm being reminded as you say that of the video we did last week of don't forget that you can tap into whatever timeline you want. And by timeline, I mean you can tap into whatever energy you want, no matter what's happening around you or no matter where other people in your life are at around you, that you can always choose joy and you can always choose bliss and freedom.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, this picture of somebody, in a jail cell, but the door's unlocked. Like you can get out at any time. It's in self-imposed prison that you can get out of at any time.
Yes.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And bringing that back to the topic today of just sexuality, there is joy in sexuality. There is joy in sex, and being okay with tapping into that as well. And being able to honor that.
And if you don't know how to do that yet, maybe even just saying out loud or setting an intention of I set the intention to open to joy in this part of my life, and maybe asking your guides or higher self to show you the way, and then just be patient and listen and watch.
Yes.
Yeah. Anything else from you, Denise?
No, that's feeling complete.
Yeah, same.
How beautiful. Thank you.
Thank you.
And so for anybody that's watching this, if any of you are feeling called to work with either Jess or I, we're going to put our information and ways that you can contact us in the notes of this so that you can get a hold of us. But just so much love to everybody who's watching this. And my hope is that you feel empowered after watching this, and that you feel that there is something different that's available to you after watching this. So
Agreed. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Much love, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.